everyone. I am back with another great interview. And I met Cindy Nelson at a Certified Senior Advisor conference. So if you recall, that was the credential that I received last year after a pretty tough test. Cindy Nelson was a speaker at this conference, and I actually invited her to our channel, and she so graciously accepted. So I will tell you a little bit about Cindy. And before I go into that, I'll just introduce myself real quick if we haven't met. My name is Laura Smothers-Chu, and I am the CEO and founder of Befriended Heart, where I help daughters navigate their parents' dementia. So, going back to Cindy Nelson, she is an elder law attorney at Nelson Elder Care Law in Marietta, Georgia. She also founded this law practice. And in 6 years of just practicing as a lawyer, an elder care lawyer, she was recognized as the Georgia Super Lawyer and the top 10 best attorneys for client satisfaction. She's worked with thousands of families, many of whom experience dementia, and the number is increasing all the time. Cindy, welcome to Joy in Dementia. It's great to have you here.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm very honored to be part of this today.
Absolutely. So, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your expertise?
Sure. So, actually, law was not my first career. I spent about 25 years in information technology with Fortune 100 companies, and then got to a point in my life where I felt like I should probably be doing something to help people instead of just helping executives sit in the big offices upstairs. I really didn't know what that was, and I certainly would not have thought that it was law. But my son had always wanted to be an attorney, and he was preparing to take the LSAT test. And as he was doing that, he wasn't studying as much as I would have liked for him to be. So I decided to make a bet to him. And I said, hey, I'll bet I could beat you on this LSAT. And he was like, oh, bring it on. And so we had the bet. We both went and took the LSAT, and I beat him by 1 point. And so, of course, he was devastated and said, no way, can't be do-over. So I said, fine, bring it on, let's do it. So we went and took the LSAT again, and we both increased our score, but I still beat him by 1 point. Now, I didn't think much of this at that point. I just thought that I had motivated him. But then law school started sending me free scholarships to go to law school there. And I thought, I don't want to go to law school. I've never wanted to go to law school. I'm not really even sure I like lawyers. And it's just not really my personality.
Mm-hmm.
But I did finally get a full boat offer from Southern Illinois University. But I kept thinking, I don't know what kind of law I'm going to practice because I don't want to talk to criminals. I don't want to just talk with families that are breaking up. I don't want to do contracts. I could think of every kind of law I did not want to do. But
Right.
I still trudged on and ended up quitting my job and going to law school. And about the first week that I was there, I thought, well, I'm used to being really busy, and they had a free elder law clinic. So I'll go and volunteer there and see what that's all about. Well, that was it. It was like the sky opened up and just, ta-da! Because as I started to learn about this the first day, I knew that's why I was there.
So, do you have any personal experience with dementia, Cindy?
I do. I just this summer had an uncle that passed away from dementia, and it was my father's brother. So that's been my only real close experience. But I've gotten so close to my clients over the years, and seeing them go through it that it's a heartbreaking disease if you look at it from one way, but you can also look at it from another way and find a lot of joy in it. It makes people let down their defenses.
Yeah.
And so you really see who maybe, a part of them that they couldn't let out before gets to come out.
Yeah.
And so that's, to me, really joyful.
Yeah. Yeah, and I did not pay her to say that, even though
Oh, no.
joy and dementia. But that's why I think Cindy and I are have a connection, and that's why I brought her on this channel, because I think we share a lot of the same beliefs. And Cindy, how did your life experience shape your career, particularly when you were growing up?
Yeah, I grew up in a very poor family on the south side of Chicago, in a small trailer. I mean, very small. A lot of people have much larger campers than what we lived in. It's like you would walk in and there was a couch built into the front of the trailer, and that was the living room. And then there was a little table and a kitchen area. And you walk down the hall, and there were bunk beds built into the hallway, and then you walk through a little bathroom, and it ended in my parents' bedroom that was really just the bed. So I don't really know how we had any belongings or anything in this little thing, but yeah, I mean, I didn't know any different, and that's just how I grew up. But I saw my parents work very hard all throughout their life. My mom was always working. She was never a stay-at-home mom, and she worked at least one job. My dad always worked at least two, sometimes three jobs, just trying to make ends meet. And so I think this is what really captivated me when I went to the elder law clinic was I saw that one thing I didn't know is as we get older, what people have saved their whole life, they could lose very quickly because they get ill. And it's a middle class problem. It's not for the upper class, and it's not even for, the indigent, because both of them got it covered. Either, the higher class have their money to pay for it, or indigent has government benefits that will pay for it. But if you're the middle class and you've done everything right, you've saved your money, which I saw my parents work so hard to do, you could get sick. And because of the way that our system works today, the medical coverage and the cost of medical care, you could lose it very quickly. And then I saw that there's a way around that, that doesn't have to be the only way, because none of us could have ever thought that we're going to save our money just to give, for medical care. We would have been taking trips or buying that new car or, updating our house or whatever. We would have never saved it if we knew that's what we were saving for, at least not as much of it. And so then when I found out there's a way that you don't have to lose it all, that you can protect what you have done, that I thought, oh my gosh, this is something nobody knows about. I don't know how they would know about it unless, you're actually an elder law attorney, because it's very complicated. It takes a lot of different laws from, disability and Medicare and Medicaid and et cetera, and brings them all together that are very complex. But if you know about it, you can take steps to protect your life savings. And to me, that was the big aha.
Absolutely. Perfect. Well, thank you so much for sharing that, Cindy. And I'd love to get into the recommendations that we have for long distance daughters. What do you think is the first most important thing that daughters do with their parents?
I think it's really important to sit down and have some type of discussion. And I know it doesn't have to be gloom and doom. Um, I talk to my clients about it's the aging cruise. And so if you're going to go on a cruise, what kind of cabin do you want? What kind of cruise line do you want? Do you want to be with other people that are like you? So I think you can put a twist on it that isn't gloom and doom, but what kind of things would you like for the rest of your life? And I think we all need to be having those conversations, because we don't have a promise of what tomorrow is going to bring. And we all have different things. And if you don't have the conversation, you don't really know. But all of our parents would like to remain as independent as possible and
Hmm.
keep their dignity. I can tell you that everybody over 50 years old has three things that they're worried about. And one is that we're going to run out of money because we don't know how much and how long we're going to need it. Number two is that we don't want to be a burden on our children. Nobody wants to think of their children taking care of their personal hygiene needs. And three is we don't want to lose our independence. We don't want somebody making decisions for us that we don't like. And so
Right.
if we can have those conversations up front and understand what is it that we can work together to achieve before we're in that situation, it's a much easier conversation. And it doesn't have to be gloom and doom. I tell people, do not sit down at the dinner table and say, well, if I die or if I become incapacitated tomorrow, don't approach it that way. Come from a better perspective that, if you had the magic wand and you could do anything you wanted to do, what would that look like?
Think especially with a diagnosis of dementia, the caregiving parent is going through so much that they are not even able to think about this future stuff, which I think is why it's even more important for the daughter to bring this up. Because I think, as Cindy said, your caregiving parent is it's sort of in the back of their mind, but they also don't want to feel like they're the ones that bring it up too, because they're going through so much emotionally as the spouse, right? So I think it's a great opportunity for you as a daughter to talk about the future, especially when there's not a crisis going on, right? Just
Yes.
doing it beforehand. And yeah, I totally agree
That's
with
a
that, Cindy.
That's really a good point because really I find most caregiving parents are in denial. So they can't see the forest for the trees. They can't see beyond what they're doing today. And they really want to believe that their spouse is not going to get any worse. But
Mhm.
we all know that that's not the case. And someone's got to be looking down the road as to where the journey is going to go.
Yeah, it is. It is a progressive disease and it's unpredictable. And so it's really important to talk about these things and also understand what the values that your caregiving parent holds and your forgetful parent, right? Especially if it's early on in the diagnosis for your forgetful parent, you can find out what their wishes are ahead of time. And so that way you're avoiding the stress of needing to figure out what they want. And we'll go into that a little bit later, but that's a good
Yeah.
intro. What's the next thing that is most important, Cindy, when after having the conversation with your caregiving parent, maybe one of the things to mention in this conversation to change?
Right. So everybody over 18 should have a financial power of attorney. To me, that's the most important legal document that any of us need. And a lot of people don't have that because, one, they don't think they need to. They think that if they're married, their spouse can do everything for them, but in reality, they cannot. And they don't understand how many different things are impacted. So let me give you an example of that. A good financial power of attorney allows somebody that you choose to make decisions for you in regards to any financial aspect in your life. And it could be, as maybe the daughter, you're trying to help mom and dad with a medical payment and you want to get the invoice and make sure that the billing is right and stuff. Well, they won't talk to you if you don't have a financial power of attorney. They won't even talk to the caregiving spouse about it. And so there's a lot of limitations today, but one that a lot of people can relate to is if you've ever tried to call Comcast and talk to them about your bill when it's not in your name. They will not talk to you. And that's just one little thing. That's your cable. But we're talking about, what about your house insurance, your car insurance, your medical insurance, if you have to change any of those? Or what about your 401k? And yeah, you got a beneficiary on there, but that's only good when you pass away, not when you're alive. So, what if your spouse needs to get to that money to help pay for your care? They won't be able to do it without a financial power of attorney. So, I think that's the most important everybody needs.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just kind of laugh about the Comcast because I feel like we've all been through that and it's just so frustrating. So, yeah, absolutely. I think you mentioned in our previous conversation we had, Cindy, about a HIPAA form that daughters can get on the internet. Can you talk a little bit about that and what it is?
Yeah, I sure can. So, all of us, when we go to the doctor, we sign a HIPAA form that gives that doctor the authority to talk to whoever we put on that form. But that is only good for that doctor. And physicians get fined hundreds of thousands of dollars if they talk to the wrong people that they don't have authorization to give that information. So they are very, very cautious about who they speak to. But all of us can go on the internet and get a generic HIPAA form, and we can have our parents sign that that says that the doctors can talk to us. And my mother lives out of state as well. So she goes to the doctor and she comes home and I say, "How did it go?" And she's, "Oh, well, he gave me another pill." I'm like, "Okay, well, what is that for?" "Oh, I don't know." And I don't have to, grill her for that. I don't have to lawyer her, as she calls it. I can just call the doctor the next day and figure out what's going on. I don't have to be in that kind of relationship with my mother. So I highly recommend that because none of us understand when we go into the doctor. There's so many different things, and especially if we're having some cognitive impairment, and and even being a caregiver for someone with cognitive impairment, there's already so much going on. So it's a good idea to get that HIPAA form, and you can get it online and just have your parents sign it. It doesn't need to be witnessed or notarized or anything like that. So it's really
Great.
an easy tool that we can
Yeah.
use.
Excellent. And I'll put a link below to a HIPAA form because and I
Oh,
love the fact that it doesn't need to be notarized because my mom just sold her house in Pennsylvania and it was just this whole big thing and I actually signed the wrong line and it was just a mess. So anything that's, as easy that we can prepare for ahead of time, I think this is a great suggestion, Cindy. And can we talk about if the POA is not made, power of attorney is not made for financial or medical, what the alternative is, which is not great.
Yeah, and this is another reason to talk about it early is a lot of people with a dementia diagnosis will start to get paranoid. And so once they get into that stage, they don't want to sign anything because they're scared. So if you can talk to them before they get to that stage and have this all wrapped up, then it's beautiful. But if you cannot get them to sign anything, and this is becoming more and more frequent in our practice, I would say we probably have 3 or 4 people a week, families come in with this, where they've got someone with dementia and they couldn't ever get them to sign anything. And now they have to go through a process called a guardianship and conservatorship. And that is through the probate court. It usually costs several $1,000s and it usually takes several months to get. But that's the only way that you're going to get authority to make financial or medical decisions for someone if they have not already signed the power of attorney. So you really want to avoid that. It's a horrible experience because your parent needs to be in the courtroom and you have to take the stand in front of them and say everything they've done wrong. So I think it's the worst thing families can go through. But
Yeah.
you really want to avoid that if you can.
Yeah, and I'll actually talk a little bit more about guardianship in a couple months with someone that I interview to go in a bit more into it. But yeah, thank you for sharing that, Cindy. And so that's something that we definitely want to avoid. It really reflects the sooner that we talk about this, the better for everyone, right? For to avoid these emotional and financial costs that Cindy mentioned. And what is the last step that is most important to daughters to do and to mention in this conversation that they have with their caregiving parents, Cindy?
Well, I think that it should be clear that everyone should have a will. They don't have to have a will, but they probably want to have a will. Every state has laws about how your stuff is going to be distributed. So the state decides. But if you have a will, then you get to decide who do you want to be the executor or the manager to make sure that everything happens the way that you want it to happen, and who do you want your stuff to go to. But if you don't have that will, then every state has some decisions that will be made for you. And it isn't necessarily the decisions you want. For example, in the state of Georgia, if you have children, everything does not go to your spouse. You have to split it between your children and your spouse, no matter how old your children are. And so I'm not a fan of that because my children don't make my house payment. So I really don't want them to. to get part of my house and my husband not to get it all. So, you can make your own decisions, but again, if you make them up front, you get to make them. If you don't make them, then others are going to make them for you.
Yeah, and I think that's a really great point, Cindy, that you should definitely research to see what the rule is in the state where your parents live. See what the rules are there with probate, and so you can present this information to your parents and not. I don't want to say that it's a fear mongering thing, but I know some other daughters who have started this conversation saying like, hey mom, I just updated my will and I thought maybe you might want to do it with me or something like that, right?
Mm.
So they don't feel like it's, like Cindy said, doom and gloom, and they're just sort of like, oh well, my daughter did it, maybe I could do it. Another thing you could do, there's a lot of different, you can be creative as far as how you bring this up, and you can play it by ear when you first bring it up and see like how did that how did
Right.
that strategy go, and then maybe change it next time, right? But another thing is maybe states have laws that are being updated all the time. So even if your parents had a will but it wasn't updated, you can say, hey mom, the state laws have been updated and I want to make sure that your will is still valid, right? So maybe we can go back and update. So there are different ways you can look at it, but this is a really great opportunity to say, hey mom and dad, I want you to decide where your things are going, right? And this is a way for them to protect their dignity and independence, as Cindy said. So I think that it's really important to mention that part, right? Because your parents still want to be able to have a say in things, and this is the best way for them to do that, right, Cindy?
Yes, I'll tell you, Laura, most parents made a will when they had us children, and they have not touched it since.
Right.
And so they have people that are going to make decisions for them that, probably aren't in their life anymore. They probably have someone that they named to raise you. That's how old a lot of wills are that I see.
Yeah, and of course we have family dynamics, right? And family dynamics don't fit into the black and white spaces that the state does for probate, right? So,
Right.
so things, as Cindy mentioned, things can change over the years, and so this is a really great way for your parents to update what they want in the future. And can you talk a little bit about, Cindy, like the importance of having the original copy of the will? Because I know I've talked with some long distance daughters that say, oh, yes, I know where the will is. It's in this drawer, but they've never actually seen it. So can you talk about the value of actually reading the will and getting the original copy?
Some parents don't intend it, but it's a scavenger hunt. That the will is somewhere in this house that they've lived in for 30 years, and you just have to find the right place and the right piece of paper. But in reality, you have to have the original will. So you can't take a copy to probate court. They won't accept it. It has to be the original. So it's really best for you to have the original or to have it in a safe place that you know where it's at and that you can get to it. Otherwise, it's like not having a will at all. Because if you have a copy without the original, it's not valid. So it's just the same as not having a will.
Wow. And you can still, we talked a teeny bit about this, Cindy, but you can still be in probate court even if you have a will. And so that's why, again, it's important to know what your state's laws are to try to avoid probate court as much as possible. And there's actually a really good solution that my family heard about from their elder law attorney, which is creating a trust. So can you talk a little bit about that, Cindy, and how you don't need to be a millionaire to create one?
Yes. So even before I went to law school, what I knew about a trust was some rich kid somewhere had a trust fund and they got money doled out, for expensive cars and stuff. And I knew that wasn't me. So I really never paid any attention. But what I have discovered is that trusts are not just for millionaires. You do not have to have a lot of money for a trust. You actually can get a lot of advantage just being a normal person like us and having a trust. So the way it works is it's really just a contract. And your will leaves everything into the trust. And then from your trust, you pick a manager of the trust, depending on what kind. It could be you could be the manager of the trust while you're alive and have capacity, or you could pick somebody else that you have a lot of confidence in. But ultimately, when you're done with everything, instead of being distributed from the will, it's actually distributed from the trust. And one advantage, there's different kinds of trust, but one advantage is that you can avoid probate court. And
Mm.
so, if you don't know, probate court can be anywhere from 5 to 15% of the gross estate. So that's the cost of the house and anything that's owned, 5 or 15%. So that can be very costly and it can take a long time. So
Hmm.
in the state of Georgia, you're talking at least 6 to 9 months. Best case scenario to get through probate. And then if you have any family dynamics or any creditors or there's different things like that that can hold it up for, years. We have one family that they're unable to sell the house that was their mother's, and so we can't close probate, and that's been 4 years now. So
Wow.
there's a lot of different things that are outside of your control that can delay this. And a lot of times, because it does take so long, houses that have a mortgage on them will end up going into foreclosure because nobody can afford to pay the taxes and the house payment, etc., while it goes through this lengthy probate process. A trust is also used to protect assets so that you don't have to pay them to Medicaid and you can qualify for benefits there. So it can be a really great tool, but many people, even professionals, CPAs, financial planners, other attorneys, think, oh, you have to be a millionaire before you need a trust. And that is not true. I'll tell you, for you long distance daughters, even if your parents aren't willing to pay a few $1,000s to get this trust, I would encourage you to do that because, in the end, that is the best gift that you can give to your family. Things are so easy after someone has passed. And it could be that, it's the forgetful parent that passes, or it could be the caregiver parent. But both of them, you could avoid probate twice by having a trust. So to me, it's really a fabulous tool. You have to find an elder law attorney to get it done right. But you'll be very glad one day that you did that. You'll be saying, oh, thank Lord.
Yeah, and Cindy, I'm saying that right now because I was able to convince my parents to do a trust. And I
Mhm.
actually didn't even know that I'd be able to avoid probate for both my parents. So that's just a like
Yes,
extra cherry on top. But
that's right.
the other thing too is like the financial cost of probate could be like anywhere from, to $200,000, right? Like it could
Right.
just be so extreme, and really you're just spending $5,000 to save yourself $200,000, right? So it's sort of like a no-brainer
Exactly.
for us
Right.
long distance daughters, working in our jobs. Like we do budgets all the time, so this is, it's really worth the investment. And two, it saves you a lot of paperwork. I can say that from what I've learned about how probate court works and everything. So in addition to it being like super financially costly, it really is a lot of paperwork and a lot of phone calls and all of this coordination. Whereas for our trust, my family's trust, once my parent passes away, I share
Mm.
the responsibility with their bank, right? So the bank can do the stuff that I don't really want to do, right? And then I
Right.
can kind of manage it as my parents have asked me to. So that,
Mhm.
I feel like that takes a lot of pressure off me since I'm trying to start a family soon too, and I'll have
Mhm.
my hands full. So I really feel like this is a great way. I think really the only con of trust is the cost, and as we mentioned, it's really worth the investment even if your parents aren't wanting to do it. The other thing I want to recommend too is Cindy mentioned earlier about how parents really don't want to be a burden to their kids. And if this is a value that your caregiving parent has and your forgetful parent has, this would be something really great to bring up. And it's something that I brought up with my parents because it was the main concern I had that, I wanted them to be able to provide for their own medical expenses. And the way to protect those assets, the best way to do that was creating a trust. And
Mhm.
I think ultimately, one of the reasons why my mom decided to do the trust was because she didn't want to put that burden on me, right?
Mhm.
And she wanted me to be able to share that responsibility with her bank that she already, has a relationship with, right?
Right.
So I totally agree with Cindy that I highly recommend having a trust. And I hear, Cindy, from long distance daughters that, what if they have no time to be there with their parent to visit the elder law attorney? What's a step that they could take that would still really make a difference in this process?
Right. So we have several different children that will go and figure out, who's a good attorney to go to. And then they'll call us up and make the appointment for their parent, just trying to make it easier on their parents. Sometimes they're able to dial in because the meeting usually takes about an hour, hour and a half. And, sometimes they can dial into that. And so they can hear what's going on and understand the conversation and be there to remind their parents, later if it was too much for them to absorb at one time, then you've got three sets of ears instead of one or two. So that always helps.
I think there's definitely ways to help as your long distance and really research a good elder law attorney, maybe even setting the appointment for
Mhm.
for your parents so they don't really have an excuse. And I would probably still try to visit, like be there for a weekend or a day or something the day of the appointment, and just escort your parents just to encourage them to go if that's possible. And also too, it's so important, as Cindy mentioned, there are good and bad in every profession, right? So for elder law attorney, definitely look at all the reviews, try to vet them as much as possible before really committing to an appointment, and try to also talk to somebody on the phone and just see how they treat you as a potential client, because that's especially telling, right? So those are things too that your parents, especially with their hands completely full with this dementia diagnosis, are not really going to think to pay attention to. So that's something that we can really pay attention to, that detail. I would also too ask, Cindy, you, I think, are you a member of certain associations as an elder law attorney? Do you recommend there's a certain one that we look up and make sure that the elder law attorney we found is in this association?
Yes, so there's the National Association of Elder Law Attorneys. It's NAELA. So you would certainly want somebody that is a member of that. But I'm going to echo what you said, Laura. Call their office, see how the people on the phone are to you, because if they're not good on the phone, it's not going to be good in person either. And if your
Right.
parents go in, I mean, first, most of us are afraid and intimidated to go see an attorney, and especially our parents. They might never have been to an attorney other than closing on a house. And
Mhm.
so going in there, the first things they think of is it's going to be expensive and they're going to be intimidated. Someone's going to talk over their head. So you want to make sure that who you send them to doesn't do that
Right.
because otherwise they're going to shut that door forever. So yeah,
Right.
you will want to make some phone calls and talk with the office and understand even how is the parking. So I think those are
Right.
questions you want to ask when you're looking at that. And what's the office like? So, is it wheelchair friendly or elderly friendly?
Absolutely, because I think that is a good indication as to whether, if you do end up going with your parents personally, just that for that one appointment, that's going to determine, like, is the lawyer going to just talk with you and just completely ignore your parents, right? Because I've had experiences with some professionals where my parents used to live, and that's just like, whoa, that is a big red flag. That
Right.
means that your parents' wishes are not going to be respected, and they're not going to feel fulfilled in that interaction, and therefore won't take the steps that really would be in their best interest and also your best interest, right? So
Well,
those
where
are
I've worked,
definitely really
I'm
important things to look at.
sorry, I'm going to jump in on that.
Yeah.
But if you go with your parent and the attorney does not ask you if your parent wants you to leave the room, then I think that's a problem because your parents need to have that authority and feel
Yes.
comfortable because this is their lawyer and they do need to respect their decisions.
That is such a great point. Thanks for jumping in there, Cindy. Yeah, absolutely. And awesome. Well, we covered a lot of great information, and I know it was a lot of information. So, Cindy, if you could pick one thing that long distance daughters could take away from this conversation, what would it be?
I would say to have the conversations and do what you can to get the trust. That's going to be a life changer for you and the rest of the family, for whichever parent survives and for everybody else involved. Um, it really makes a difference. You don't want to have to worry about that. You really don't want to have to worry about any of these legal things. Just get them all wrapped up in a bow, and then it's taken care of, and you can be the daughter that you want to be instead of, somebody nagging them to get things done.
Absolutely. And no one wants to be that daughter, right?
No,
So,
no.
and two, as we mentioned, if it means that you need to invest a little bit of money to make sure it gets done, it really is worth it. And while I didn't need to do that, I was totally prepared to do that.
Yes.
So, yeah, absolutely. So, Cindy, thank you so much for joining us today. And where can our viewers find you?
Yes, so we're on the internet at nelsoneldercarelaw.com, and we have an office in Marietta and Woodstock, Georgia.
Awesome. And just to make sure that that you all know, Cindy is based in Georgia, so there are different laws. But I'm sure if they had a question for you, Cindy, they'd be able to email you, and you could refer them to a good person if
Sure.
they're outside of Georgia.
Yes, absolutely.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining me today. And if you like this video, please subscribe below. And I will be back with a new guest expert next month. Bye.